everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today is a very special day because we are doing the annual Hannah Witton sex survey. Very official, very scientific, very proper, good survey of all of your sex lives. Aren't we excited? This is the third year in a row doing this. It started out as just like a very silly like Instagram poll thing that I did and then made a video about. And I mean, it's definitely still silly, but last year we had a pandemic sex theme to the questions, and I wanted to have another theme this year, and obviously I went with the theme of fertility and pregnancy and how that relates to a lot of sex and relationship stuff as well. Just a quick disclaimer before we get into these, I used Instagram's poll feature and quiz feature. So the poll feature only allows you to have 2 options, but the quiz feature allows you to have up to 4. And so when you were doing the questions, if you like picked one and it told you you were wrong and there was a correct answer, there is no correct answer. Don't worry, I'm using it as a poll, but it makes you pick a correct one to be able to use it. On with the questions. So I'm excited to dive into these. I have not looked at the results, so this is just going to be my fresh official reaction to these results. In last year's video I did mention that if you are keen for some like actual scientific data about people's sex lives, there is NatSal, which is a study done in the UK, and NatSal 4, I said this last year, is meant to be happening any day now, but the pandemic seems to have delayed it. But their website currently says that they plan to undertake the main stage of the survey in spring 2022. So I've no idea how long they take to then analyze the data and stuff that they collect, but hopefully we'll get like a new NatSal study soon, and maybe I'll do a video like looking through all of their stats as well, which could be fun. But hey, that might not be for another year. So the first thing we do is we take a look at my Instagram demographics so we can get a sense of who is answering these questions. This year we had just over 48,000 responses. I love that it's become like this thing of like, right, I'm doing the sex survey, it's like happening, like you've got 24 hours to fill out these very official questions. I'm sorry if you missed it, but you know, you just gotta follow me on Instagram and hope that you see it next year, because apparently I don't give any pre-warning. I'm just like, here it is. But yeah, 48,000 people answered the survey, so we got a nice sample size. And I just wanted to go through what Instagram says my demographics are, but I also asked some of my own questions too. They'll hopefully give us a more accurate picture. So in terms of age, the biggest chunk of my audience is the 25 to 34 year olds. That's the group that I'm also in at 48.9%. And then our next biggest chunk is the 18 to 24 year olds at 35.5%. And actually, as I thought would probably happen, my audience has gone older over the years. So that 25 to 34 group has increased and the 18 to 24 group has gotten smaller. So there's just more and more of you turning 25 like every year and just like hopping over into the older group. And then Instagram says in terms of gender that 75.3% of my audience are women and 24.6% are men. We've actually got more women than men than last year, which is nice / neutral, don't care. But also, obviously, Instagram only give you data on men and women, which doesn't take into account non-binary folks, and people might not have their actual gender as their registered gender on Instagram as well. So this is where I asked my own questions. And then in terms of countries, we've got United Kingdom as my top one, no surprises there, 39.4%. United States, 21%. And then Australia, Canada, and Germany. Yeah, no surprises there. That's kind of like what I expect. Last year, India, I think, was up there and knocked Germany off the board, but Germany's back. Germany is back, guys. Compared to last year, there's actually a bigger chunk of the percentage is UK and a smaller chunk American. Interesting. Maybe last year I was appealing to a more international audience, and this year we're like hunkering down. It's Brexit, that's what's happened. But now we're getting into the actual questions, the quiz questions that I asked it's time for the Hannah Witton Sex Survey 2022. So the first set of questions are about demographics and more general sex questions, and then we will get to the pregnancy and fertility specific questions. So first, to get a more accurate picture of gender, I asked, what is your gender? And the options were man, woman, non-binary, and other. And as predicted, yes, mostly women, but about 4,000 people responded that they were a man and almost 2,000 that they were non-binary. And then a 385 other. But how this works out percentage-wise is that actually it's 86.7% women, which is way higher than that 73%. But obviously, like the Instagram demographics is like all people who follow me, and this survey is like people who interact with my stories. So there'll also probably be a difference there as well. And then 8.5% men, 4% non-binary, and then a 0.8% other. I asked, are you trans, yes or no? And 3% said yes. Does that match up with the previous question? But there might be some non-binary people who also don't identify as trans, I guess. So that might be different, but hey. But then I just gave the option for people just to self-describe their gender, and I'm just going to read through some of these. Still questioning, not sure, tomboy with feminine, genderqueer, mostly woman, don't have one, another agender as well, still in the process of figuring it out, lesbian, question mark, it feels more accurate than woman. That's interesting. I've not heard someone use lesbian as like a gender identifier. Gender fluid, lots of gender fluid, confused, non-binary trans mask, genderqueer question mark, maybe question mark, I don't know. Non-binary trans guy / trans masculine, woman with hints of non-binary. Ooh, this is one I've not heard of. Benevoid, a xenogender label. There you go, I'm gonna have to look that up afterwards, learning something new. She, they pronouns, but not comfy with woman or non-binary. That's interesting. Demi-girl, trans femme. There's so many here. This is really fascinating. Thank you so much. So next I asked about sexuality, because obviously Instagram doesn't give you that info. I asked, are you part of the LGBTQ plus community? I didn't include the T there because we're talking about sexual orientation and not gender. And 45% said yes. Oh my goodness. I knew that my audience was very queer. I've got the stats to prove it now, because there it is. 55%. I mean, that's not going to be entirely reflective of like all of society. Like I have a very like specific niche like audience who are interested in sex and relationships topics, and often that is very appealing to LGBTQ plus folks because they're so often left out of those conversations. But I definitely think there are a lot more queer people in society than we think or than we know. I'd be interested to see like what Natsal come out with in terms of sexual orientation stats. And then to get a bit more specific, I asked, what is your sexual orientation? And it was heterosexual, homosexual, polysexual, so including attraction to multiple genders like bisexual or pansexual, and then asexual. And most people heterosexual, but actually like polysexual is a lot higher than homosexual. So heterosexual was 56.1%, which kind of matches up with that 55% before. Polysexual was 34.7%. Wow. Homosexual 6.4% and asexual 2.8%. And then I asked people what their romantic orientation was. So heteroromantic, homoromantic, polyromantic, and aromantic. I think it's really interesting to split sexual and romantic attraction because they are different things, and some asexual folks might experience romantic attraction and some aromantic folks might experience sexual attraction, but then you also get aro-ace people as well. But just in terms of like who you're attracted to as well, in terms of gender, it might differ in terms of your sexual and romantic attraction too. So still majority hetero-romantic, and I think this looks quite similar. But if we look at the percentages, so 59.2% hetero-romantic, 6.8% homoromantic, 32.9% polyromantic, and 1.1% aromantic. So that's interesting. The homoromantic and the homosexual are like really similar, but you've got more people saying they're heteroromantic and then less people saying they're polyromantic. So that's interesting. Maybe more people are more queer sexually than they are romantically. I don't know. Just a theory based off this very scientific study. But that's interesting because I would maybe say that was true for me as well. Like more open to sleeping with multiple genders than I would be having like a romantic relationship. And then I also asked people to self-describe their sexual and romantic orientation. So let's see what we have here. Queer, lesbian, lesbian and queer, aromantic, asexual, heteronormative, bisexual, heteroromantic, women, just the sexuality of women. I'm bisexual but potentially heteroromantic. I identify as grey bi. I'm not entirely sure what that means, but cool. Bi-curious and heteroromantic. Asexual, heteroromantic. Bisexual, biromantic. On the asexual spectrum and biromantic, I guess, question mark. I like dick, shrug emoji. 60% attracted to men, 40% to women, more inclined to want romantic relations with men. Mostly attracted to men, but also sexually attracted to women, but not romantically. Bisexual and not sure. Lesbian, but in a way that is about decentering men. Attracted to women, non-binary and gender non-conforming people. I've heard a few people talking about defining lesbian in that way, as it just being like, not an attraction to men. Demisexual, panromantic. There's so many here. Thank you so much for sharing. All right, next question. Have you discovered something new about your gender or sexual orientation during the pandemic? And 31% of people said yes. That is such a huge chunk of people. And I think anecdotally, I've seen it a lot online. You've maybe seen it a lot online. Lots of comings out, lots of just self-discovery. When you spend a lot of time in isolation, it's a lot of time for like questioning. Oh, but there's also 69% said no. So obviously I have to acknowledge that. Nice. And then to kind of frame these questions, I wanted to get a sense of how many people were sexually active, however they define it. And 83% said yes, they were sexually active. Now, these next few questions are comparisons to the first year I did this in 2020. Like I asked similar questions to these and I was just curious to compare the results. So I asked, do you consume porn? And 66% said yes and 34% said no. In 2020, I asked, do you watch porn? So it's a slightly different question, but the results were actually quite similar. It was 65% yes and 35% no. So like 2/3 of people consuming porn. And then of course I had to ask, do you pay for the porn that you consume? And I specified that this could be subscriptions to porn sites, audio erotica apps, or directly funding performers and writers through things like PayPal, Patreon, or OnlyFans. And 10% said yes and 90% said no. And this is actually an improvement on 2020. So in 2020, 4% said that they paid for their porn, but it was specifically about paying for the porn that you watch. So obviously I've expanded the definition of porn here and like different ways of paying for it. So that might explain for the boost, or I've gotten into your heads and every time I say pay for your porn, you've actually listened. Who knows? I know lots of people don't pay for porn that they consume because either the creator of that porn has actually like put it out there for free, or another thing that I've heard is people saying that like they don't watch it enough to like pay for a subscription. Like it might be like a once in a while thing. And I get that. And I guess like if you are going to be watching free porn because you don't really do it that often and so you don't feel like it warrants paying for it, try and be like a bit conscious about where you're watching that porn and where it's coming from and the production of that porn and like consent in that porn and all of that kind of thing. Like payment is one part of consuming porn ethically, but then there's obviously like all of these other things as well that you can be aware of. Have you had an STI checkup in the last 6 months? And this has gone down. So 16% of people said yes and 84% said no. And in 2020, 21% of you said yes. So I don't know whether that's because like people are having less sex maybe, or maybe more of you are in like long-term relationships and so maybe you're not testing as much. I think I have actually had a test in the last 6 months because we had to get our like fertility clinic referral. And like, I think when we first went to the hospital when I was pregnant, they do like loads of different tests and like STI check was one of them. Please get tested, you know, if you're sexually active between partners or every 6 months would be great. Are you / is your relationship style non-monogamous? And 18% of people said yes. And in 2020, 6% of people said that their relationship style was like polyamorous and non-monogamous. So that's a real big increase. I love that. I feel like a lot of people are exploring like ethical non-monogamy and stuff at the moment. So that's kind of interesting to see that in 2 years that has like increased quite a lot amongst you guys, amongst us. And these are 2 new general questions that actually one of my patrons suggested that I posed to the community, which I thought was interesting. So, do you talk about sex with your friends? And 75% said yes, and 25% said no. I love talking about sex with my friends, obviously, but I definitely think there are like some where it's a regular conversation that we have, and others where like it maybe actually doesn't really get talked about at all. And then, do you talk about sex with your sexual partners? And 92% said yes, and 8% said no. And I mean, I'm very happy that that's really high, but also let's aim to get that to 100%. Okay, so now we're in the pregnancy and fertility specific questions. So first off, do you want kids? And 74% said yes, and 26% said no. And actually, after I posted this survey, my friend Eva got in touch and they were like, what if you're not sure? And so right at the end of the survey, I like posted a bonus question about that. Last minute bonus question. Are you undecided / unsure if you want kids? And 44% said yes, and 56% said no. So wow. So yes, thank you, Eva, for prompting me to open up that question to allow space for people who are undecided and not sure if they want kids, because that's a big percentage. Do you feel pressure to have kids? And 54% said yes, and 46% said no. This one's an interesting one for me because I definitely feel the pressure to have kids, but I also know that I really want kids. So I think the pressure to have kids, it feels kind of neutral to me because I'm like, it's fine. Like I want kids. So like, don't worry about it. Whereas if you're someone who's unsure or you don't want kids and you're feeling that pressure, that is less fun. I think it's interesting that that pressure is felt by the majority of people because I definitely feel like it is the dominant narrative of like the life stages that you go through. And I don't think we're quite like at that stage as a society yet where we just let people do what the fuck they want, and we do kind of like have these assumptions on like how people are going to live their lives and these expectations that we put on ourselves and other people. But yes, so I asked, has the pandemic changed your interest in having kids? And the options were yes, increased, yes, decreased, and then not changed if you're in the want kids category, and not changed in the don't want kids category. So for people who their interest in having kids has increased during the pandemic, it's 22.1%, which is a lot bigger chunk than I was expecting, honestly. And for people who their interest in having kids has decreased is 17.5%. I probably would have expected the decreased number to be higher because I think we've seen a drop in the birth rate during the pandemic. Don't quote me on that. But I think that's what people have been saying has happened. But the biggest chunk of people, their interest in having kids hasn't seemed to change. Next up, do you have kids? And 9% of you said yes. I actually asked this question back in 2020, and then 5% of you had kids. So that kind of like makes sense to me. One, because my audience is getting older, but also because I have since like announced my own pregnancy online. And so I imagine that there are like other pregnant folks or other folks with kids who have maybe like found me since then and are interested in following. So that makes sense. Have you ever had an unintended pregnancy? And 8% said yes, and 92% said no. I don't know what I was expecting for this question, but I feel like it is lower than I was expecting. I don't know whether I just like thought that unintended pregnancies were like way more common, or if that's like the fear mongering that they put in you during like sex ed, and then also like stories in the media of like in like movies and TV shows, like it's always more dramatic and more exciting or whatever for the plot line if it's an unintended pregnancy. And so maybe I just like thought they were more common than they actually are, or because of the demographic of my audience of people who engage in sex education content, you're maybe less likely to have unintended pregnancies. I don't know. And then, have you ever had an abortion? And 5% had said yes, and 95% said no. I think in the UK, the statistic is 1 in 3 women. The statistic is women, but let's go with like people who can get pregnant. 1 in 3 people who can get pregnant will have an abortion in their lifetime. Obviously, that statistic is in their entire lifetime. And most of my audience are like in their 20s, and so not experienced an entire lifetime yet. But yeah, that's interesting that is a lot lower than the 1 in 3. Have you ever experienced a miscarriage or pregnancy loss? And 7% said yes, and 93% said no. My heart really goes out to you. Like, I was honestly terrified of this during my first trimester. It was, not fun to think about, obviously. Probably less fun to go through. Are you currently trying to conceive? 5% said yes, and 95% said no. Sending you lots of good fertility vibes. I really hope that it works out for you. It took us a year, but it happened. But I know lots of other people where it's like taken much longer. Are you currently pregnant? This is one I was curious about. I want to know how many of you are currently pregnant as well. 4% of you, but that's probably like still quite a hefty chunk of people considering how many people answered this survey. So hello to all of my pregnant viewers and followers. Okay, this is where we get into the territory of like, please only answer this question if it applies to you. But it's also an Instagram poll. I got lots of messages from people being like, oh no, I clicked the wrong thing. And I'm like, it's fine. Don't worry. But if you are currently or have been pregnant, do you like being pregnant? And this is fascinating because the majority of people said no, they do not like being pregnant. And this is interesting, like for me, because if I'd have been asked this question in my first trimester, hard no. Like, I hate this. This is like the worst thing ever. But now I'd be like, yeah, I love being pregnant. What was that 2 months like back then? Like, I don't remember that. Like, it's fine. And then I don't know. We'll see as we get into later pregnancy if I'm just like, I hate it again. But right now I'm like, yeah, this is great. I was born to be pregnant. But that's interesting. Yeah, a third of people said yes, they like being pregnant, and 2/3 not having a great time. I'm sorry. I think that's important for all of us to know as well, because like so many people around you are so excited about the fact that you're pregnant, and if you're having a terrible time, then that can like be exacerbated by other people like wanting you to be having a good time. And then also the fact that a lot of people obviously have a lot of difficulty getting pregnant, and then feeling like you have to be grateful, and you have to really love it, because lots of people can't who want to. But hey, if you're having a terrible time with it, you're having a terrible time with it, and I hope that you can get like the help and support that you need. And instead of people just being like, what are you complaining about, it's like, it's hard. And then for folks who have kids or want kids, I asked, how did you or are you planning on having kids? And the options were penis and vagina sex, IUI/IVF, adoption, or other. I put other there because honestly, I don't even know what the other options are. But 83.5% said penis in vagina sex, 7.1% IUI or IVF, 6.8% for adoption, and then 2.6% for other. So obviously only people who already have kids or are pregnant or want to have kids were answering this question. And you can see the hard numbers are like around 17,000 penis and vagina sex, and 1,500 IUI IVF, and 1,400 adoption, and about 500 other. Obviously I mentioned the big number for the amount of people who answered the survey was around 48,000 people, but for this specific question it was 21,000 people. So just to give you a sense of like how many people overall. And then this next question, how long did it take you to get pregnant? And just FYI, the total number of people who answered this question was 5,611 people, and the majority of people got pregnant in the first 6 months, around 4,000 people, and then it was the 6 to 12 month mark, and then 1 to 3, and then 3 years plus. But that's still like 4.6% of those people said that it took them more than 3 years. That's hard, and I think it's like important to remember, like it can happen straight away or it could be years. Did your sex life change since being pregnant? And just under 5,000 people total answered this question. 16.5% said yes, it got better, but half of people, 51% said yes, it changed it got worse. And 21.5% said yes, it changed, but like neutral about that. And 11% said that it's the same. I think I'm somewhere between like yes, better and yes, neutral. I think that's kind of where I'm at. But it's interesting to compare, like, because our sex life pre-pregnancy was like a trying to conceive kind of sex life, which was probably worse than our like not trying to conceive sex life. So it like depends like what you're comparing to. And then I also wanted to know, has your sex life changed since having kids? Because this is my future. And about 3,700 odd people answered this question, and 15.3% said yes, it's changed and it's gotten better. 53.9% said yes, it's changed and it's gotten worse. Oh no. It's not looking good. And 20.6% said yes, it's changed, but feeling kind of neutral about it. And 10.2% of you said that no, it stayed the same. But hey, one thing that I've learned recently that I'm really trying to like absorb into my life is that life is just always changing and always evolving, and we often get really like scared and panicky if our like sex life changes for whatever reason. Just decided to accept that I'm never going to have a normal again, and it's just always going to be evolving, it's always going to be changing. And actually like maybe my new normal is that just like that it's always changing, and just accepting that always going to be in a state of flux. And so yeah, that's kind of helping me like feel a bit more just like neutral about any changes that come, instead of it being like this is a good change or this is a bad change. It's just like this is just a change and that's fine, and it's not permanent because more changes are coming. But yeah, there we have it. Those are the results of the Hannah Witton Sex Survey 2022. I hope that you enjoyed just like getting nosy and nerdy with all of these questions and stats as much as I did. Thank you so much everyone who answered the survey. I really appreciate it, and I love the excitement as well around it, because I get really excited every year too. Hopefully we do another one next year. Hopefully we have a NatSal survey to also interrogate and analyze soon as well. Would love to hear your thoughts on all of these questions and answers in the comments, because obviously with the way that an Instagram survey works is that you can't really get that nuanced. So if you do have any thoughts that you want to share, feel free to leave them in the comments. I would love to read them. I hope that you're doing well, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.